Welcome to the Lodge. From the riverbanks to the end zones, we're diving deep into everything that matters most to the colony. You're listening to State of the Beavers. I'm your host, Brian, and whether you're a diehard alum, a nature enthusiast, or just here for the ecosystem, we've got you covered. Today on the show, we're breaking down the latest headlines, checking the pulse of the community, and asking the big questions that define our state today. Grab your gear, a beer, and settle in. It's time to gnaw through the noise. This is the State of the Beavers, starting right now. This segment is powered by our friends over at Castor and Cask Brewing Company. When the day's work is done and the dam is secure, there's only one way to wind down. Located in the heart of the valley, Castor and Cask is craft brewing with a wild side. From their award-winning Log Jam IPA to the smooth, dark Muddy Bank Stout, every pint is brewed with local hops and mountain-fed water. It's crisp, it's refreshing, and it's earned its place at the top of the food chain. Whether you're celebrating a big win or just cooling off after a long haul, head down to the tap room and tell them the Lodge sent you. Castor and Cask Brewing Company, respect the river, drink the beer.
Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down the biggest stories in sports. And if you thought you had the college football playoff picture all figured out, well, you're going to want to think again. A wild weekend of upsets has completely scrambled everything, and we're here to unpack all the chaos. So let's just dive right into the big question. After everything that just happened, who's actually in the college football playoff? Because let me tell you, the entire championship picture has been redrawn. Whatever you thought you knew last week, you can pretty much toss it out the window. So check this out. This is the new reality. In this projected 12-team bracket, Georgia has vaulted into the #1 seed. And right behind them, SMU, Duke, and Ohio State. Now that's a huge advantage because those top 4 teams get a first-round bye. They get to sit back, rest up, and watch everyone else beat each other up. Meanwhile, you've got powerhouses like Michigan, Miami, and USC, who are now stuck in must-win opening round games just to stay alive. So, the big question is, how on earth did we get here? How did the entire bracket get turned completely upside down in just one weekend? Well, it all came down to a couple of absolutely massive, bracket-busting upsets that, believe me, almost nobody saw coming. The biggest shockwave? No doubt about it, it came from Tuscaloosa. You had an unranked Oklahoma team that marched right into Alabama's house and stunned the Crimson Tide, 35-30. And with that one loss, Bama went from a contender to being sent spiraling right out of the playoff conversation. Just like that. And believe it or not, that wasn't even the only major upset. Over in the ACC, Virginia Tech just completely dismantled the #8 team in the country, Florida State. I mean, look at that score, a 48-21 blowout. That loss sent the Seminoles tumbling down the rankings and blew the entire ACC race wide open. And the consequences of these losses, they were absolutely massive. It wasn't just Alabama feeling the pain. We're talking 4 major programs, Utah, Alabama, Clemson, and Ole Miss, all knocked completely out of the top 25. That's a huge shift in the national landscape, and it impacts everything from bowl games to recruiting pitches. You see, these upsets don't just happen in a vacuum. They've made all of the conference championship races incredibly tight. And there's no better example of that than what's happening in the ACC. So, as you can see here, SMU is sitting pretty at the top, still undefeated in conference play. But look who's right there on their heels, Duke, with just 1 loss. And after that shocking defeat, Florida State is just desperately trying to hang on. It's going to be a mad dash to the finish line for that title game. All right, now let's hop over to the Big Ten, where we've got a 3-way dogfight for supremacy, and the margins for error are just razor thin. I mean, just look at this log jam. You've got Michigan, Ohio State, and a surging USC all sitting there with the exact same 6-1 conference record. For these 3 giants, every single game from here on out is basically a playoff game. There is absolutely zero room for error. And if you think that's chaotic, Oh, just you wait. Let's take a look at the Big 12. A new leader has emerged from the pack, but their grip on that top spot is, well, let's just say it's anything but secure. So right now, Texas Tech sits all alone at the top with a 7-1 record. But don't get too comfortable, because lurking right behind them, you've got teams like Iowa State and Baylor, both with only 2 conference losses. Yeah, this race is still wide, wide open. And finally, let's head down to the SEC. We've got a familiar face leading the pack, but some new challengers are rising fast, and they are ready to pounce on any little mistake. Georgia is holding on to that top spot, but just barely, after a really tight win over Texas. And check this out. Arkansas now only has 1 conference loss, and Texas A&M is on a tear with a 4-game winning streak. Trust me, the SEC title is still very much up for grabs. Now, with all this team drama going on, you just know it's going to have a huge impact on the race for the best individual player in the country, right? The Heisman Trophy race is definitely heating up and getting a major shakeup of its own. SMU's quarterback, Kevin Jennings, is still the frontrunner, holding steady at the top, but the big story here? It's Oklahoma's quarterback, John Mateer. After that incredible performance he had against Alabama, he is just soaring up everybody's board. And this is exactly why. Mateer's dual threat ability was the difference maker, plain and simple. He threw for a touchdown and, as you can see, ran for a jaw-dropping 138 yards on the ground, leading that game-winning drive. It was an absolute star-making performance that put the entire country on notice. And this chart of the betting odds really just paints the picture, doesn't it? It shows just how close this race has become. While Jennings is still the favorite, you can see that Indiana's Fernando Mendoza and now Oklahoma's John Mateer are right on his heels. This is absolutely anyone's trophy to win. So the crucial point to remember here is that this chaos is far from over. In fact, it might just be getting started. The upcoming weekend is absolutely loaded with games that have massive playoff and conference title implications. First up, get ready for this one. We have a monster Big Ten clash as USC travels to Eugene to take on a very, very tough Oregon team. A loss here for either of them could pretty much end their conference championship hopes for good. The odds makers are expecting a close game, but they are giving the edge to the home team, making Oregon a 6-point favorite. This game is a certified must-watch, with huge stakes for that already crowded Big Ten race. Next up, over in ACC, the undefeated conference leader and current number 2 seed in the playoff, SMU, has to defend its home turf against a tough Louisville squad that's looking to play spoiler. SMU is favored by 4.5 points, but this has trap game written all over it. A loss for the Mustangs wouldn't just open the door for Duke in the ACC, it could jeopardize their crucial first-round bye in the college football playoff. The stakes are huge. So all of this sets the stage for another weekend that could change everything all over again. The path to a championship is more unpredictable than ever. The only question left is, which team is going to survive the final stretch?
Welcome to the debate. We are looking at one of the most perplexing and, frankly, interesting case studies in college football this season. We've hit the Week 13 bye, and the Oregon State Beavers are sitting at a staggering 10-1 record, ranked number 19 in the nation, and they're getting ready for the Las Vegas Bowl. This is a program that, almost everyone projected for a rebuilding year, a year zero, if you will. And yet, here they are, matching their highest win total in 2 decades.
It is certainly a pretty record on paper, yeah. 10-1 looks fantastic on a Wikipedia page or, a recruit's Instagram feed. But the question we're here to answer isn't whether they won the games. The scoreboard tells you they did. The question is how they won them. Is this record the result of a brilliant recalibration by new head coach Caleb Ward, like all the headlines are saying? Or is this whole thing a statistical house of cards built on a soft schedule, some unsustainable turnover luck, and a few bounces that are just bound to run out the second they face a team like Florida?
Well, I think you know where I stand on this. I look at this season and I see a masterclass in program architecture. Coach Ward didn't come in to rebuild, he came in to recalibrate. And I think that distinction really matters. He took a stagnating roster and instilled a philosophy that it's just clearly working. He said it on day one. You don't need to beat them in recruiting every year. You need to beat them on Saturdays. And that isn't just coach speak. It's the operational reality of this team. They're winning with development, not just, a bunch of 5-star guys.
And just hear me out,
It's the reality of facing opponents with a combined record of 66 and 63, right? Let's not pretend they've run a gauntlet of SEC powerhouses here. But okay, let's get into the specifics before we crown anyone.
Let's do that, because to just dismiss this as luck is to ignore the tangible shifts in performance. I mean, we are looking at a team that made a mid-season quarterback switch, a decision most coaches would be terrified to make when they're 5-1, and it sparked an offensive explosion. We're looking at a defense that, yeah, it gives up yards, but it consistently makes the plays that actually decide games. That isn't an accident. That is design.
I come at it from a different angle. I look at Week 7, the Duke disaster. That was the one week where the ball didn't bounce their way. The one week they faced a team that forced them to play from behind without a safety net, and what happened? They lost 37-24. Duke exposed the ceiling of this team. Since then, they've beaten up on lesser competition, or they've relied on statistical miracles, like that insane Iowa State sequence we have to talk about later, just to pad the win column. I'm just not convinced that the recalibration is anything more than a favorable variance in probability.
I see why you'd think that, but let me offer a different perspective on the season's trajectory. This 10-1 record, it matches the highs of 2006 and 2022. That doesn't happen by accident in Power 4 football. I don't care what the schedule is. The turning point was clearly the decision to bench Malik Murphy for Gabourey Johnson after that Duke loss. Ward called it a temporary measure at the time, but it became the catalyst for the entire offense. And Johnson, I mean, he has been nothing short of elite since he took over.
Elite is a very strong word for 5 games, and most of those were played with a comfortable lead.
The numbers support the terminology. Since that switch, Gabourey Johnson is completing 73% of his passes. He's thrown 14 touchdowns to only 1 interception. His passer rating is 202.0. Now compare that to Murphy's 139.9. This isn't just a hot hand. This is the Bible offense, as Ward calls his scheme, finally being unlocked. Johnson's mobility and his efficiency have added a vertical and horizontal dimension that Murphy, well, he simply couldn't provide. Look at the Washington State game in Week 10, 45-0. Johnson threw for 3 touchdowns and ran for 2 more. That is total domination.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the Washington State game proves Johnson is elite. You mentioned that 45-0 score, and yeah, it sounds impressive, but you have to look at the context of the plays. In that very game, Gabourey Johnson threw an interception because he was hit while throwing. Now, against a top-tier team, that's a momentum swinger, a huge one. But what happened? The very next play, the Oregon State defense forces a fumble and recovers it. Johnson gets the ball right back on the 3-yard line. He didn't have to pay for his mistake.
But he capitalized on the opportunity. That is what good teams do. You punish mistakes.
It's what lucky teams do. My whole concern with the Murphy to Johnson narrative is that we are scapegoating Murphy for the Duke loss. Murphy threw 3 interceptions against Duke, yes, but look at his performance in Week 6 against Liberty right before that. 205 yards, 2 touchdowns, 76% completion. He wasn't playing poorly. The team had a bad day against Duke. Johnson has benefited immensely from these positive game scripts where Oregon State is already winning. We haven't seen Johnson have to drop back and throw 40 times to claw back from a 14-point deficit against a legitimate defense.
I think you're underestimating the difficulty of the throws Johnson is making regardless of the score. In the Arizona game, Week 9, he had Trent Walker for an 84-yard touchdown. That wasn't some screen pass where the receiver did all the work. That was a vertical shot right down the seam. The Bible offense requires a quarterback who can stress the defense deep to open up the run lanes. Murphy was solid, I agree, but he was averaging 7.2 yards per attempt. Johnson is averaging 10.5. That is a fundamental difference in explosiveness. The decision to switch wasn't panic, it was precise diagnostics by Ward.
And that 84-yard touchdown to Trent Walker is exactly the kind of statistical anomaly I'm talking about. It's a great play, sure, but it masks the fact that the offense can be incredibly inconsistent down to down. But let's pivot to the other side of the ball, because this is where the recalibration narrative really starts to fray for me. This defense, led by Jimmy Walker, who I know is leading the Broyles Award race for top assistant, is living on the edge of a cliff.
Jimmy Walker has orchestrated a unit that leads the country in opportunistic plays. You call it living on the edge? I call it a culture of aggression. Look at the Iowa State game in Week 8. That sequence was legendary. Zachary Card returns a kickoff 98 yards for a touchdown. On the ensuing kickoff, David Wells Jr. forces a fumble, and Oregon State scores. Then, on the very next kickoff, Jimmy Valson III forces another fumble, and they score again. 3 touchdowns in a matter of seconds. You cannot call that luck. That is special teams and defense swarming the ball.
That is the definition of unsustainable. You cannot plan a game strategy around let's force 2 fumbles on kickoffs back to back. If you take away that freakish sequence, the Iowa State game is a dogfight. And if you look at the yardage they give up, the cracks are everywhere. Minnesota, a team that is hardly an offensive juggernaut, put up 352 total yards against this defense in Week 11. Drake Lindsey threw for 320 yards.
And Oregon State won 35-24. They bend, but they do not break. That's the point.
They break plenty. They just get bailed out by the opponent dropping the ball. In Week 9, Arizona put up 391 total yards. Oregon State had 388. Arizona actually outgained them. Noah Fifita threw for 335 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was shredding that secondary. The only reason Oregon State survived was, again, timing. They forced turnovers in the red zone or get a clutch stop on 4th down. But when you are allowing 300-plus passing yards to unranked teams, what do you think Florida is going to do in Las Vegas?
I would frame it differently. I think you're looking at yardage as the ultimate metric of success, whereas Ward and Walker value disruption. Yes, Fifita threw for yards, but Oregon State won the turnover battle in almost every key matchup. Look at the leaders on this defense. Skylar Thomas has 68 tackles and is finishing plays all over the field. Romello Davis has 64 tackles and 13 tackles for loss. These aren't passive players waiting for mistakes. They are forcing the issue. The bend don't break paradox is only a paradox if you think turnovers are random. I would argue that under Ward, they're skill.
Okay, intellectual cherry is essential here, so I will concede that Romello Davis is having a fantastic season. 13 TFLs is legitimate disruption. But reliance on turnovers is historically volatile. In the Duke game, the one loss, Oregon State turned the ball over 4 times and only forced 1. When the turnover margin flips, they lose by double digits. That is the concern. They don't have a suffocating defense that forces 3 and outs. They have a gambling defense.
Let's discuss the engine that allows that gambling defense to stay off the field. Anthony Hankerson. If we are talking about the legitimacy of this 10-1 record, we have to talk about the man who is currently 4th in the Maxwell race and 1st for the Doak Walker. 1,381 rushing yards, 14 touchdowns. He has been the stabilizer.
Hankerson is a workhorse, absolutely. 187 carries is a heavy load. But this just feeds back into my worry about one-dimensionality. The entire Bible offense seems predicated on Hankerson winning his individual matchup.
And he wins it almost every time, even when opponents know it's coming.
Except when he didn't. Go back to Duke. He had 20 carries for 110 yards, which looks good on the stat sheet, but the team averaged 3.8 yards per carry overall in that game. When Duke decided to take away the easy run lanes and force Murphy and later the team to beat them through the air in a trailing script, the offense collapsed. So my question is, if Florida stacks the box in the bowl game and holds Hankerson to 3 yards a carry, does Gabari Johnson have the volume experience to win a shootout without the run game acting as a crutch?
I think you're ignoring the evolution that has happened since Week 7. That Duke game was with Murphy starting. With Johnson, the threat of the quarterback run opens up lanes for Hankerson that simply weren't there before. Johnson has 188 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns himself. That dual threat capability, it just freezes linebackers. It's why Hankerson averaged 9.1 yards per carry against Washington State and 5.7 against Minnesota. The scheme allows Hankerson to thrive, and Hankerson allows the play action to Trent Walker and Zachary Card to work. It's symbiotic.
It's symbiotic against mediocre defenses. Look, Hankerson is a phenomenal talent, but he had a fumble in the Minnesota game. He had 2 fumbles in the Fresno State game way back in Week 2. He puts the ball on the ground. When you combine a running back who fumbles with a defense that relies on opponent fumbles, you're playing a game of Russian roulette. So far, the gun has clicked on an empty chamber 10 times.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it ignores the resilience the team has shown. You call it Russian roulette, I call it composure. Look at the Kentucky game in Week 12. Kentucky tied it up, they were pushing, but Oregon State closed it out 35-21. Why? Because when the pressure mounted, the recalibration held firm. Ward's quote regarding the Iowa State win really stuck with me. It's not on them to carry the weight I put on the team. He is absorbing the pressure. The players are just executing.
That is a nice quote, and Ward is certainly a charismatic leader. But the recalibration narrative hasn't been tested by elite Power 4 talent consistently. The best win on their resume is arguably the Week 4 win against Oregon, 42-10.
Which was a blowout. You can't ask for more than that.
A scoreboard blowout, yes. But Oregon committed 2 turnovers and went 0 for 1 on 4th down early in that game. Oregon State played a clean game, I'll give them that. But that was September. Teams change. Since then, Oregon State has been playing a schedule of teams that are just finding themselves. They haven't played a Georgia, a Texas, or an Ohio State. They are beating Kentucky, Minnesota, and Liberty. Good wins, sure, but not indicative of a top 20 powerhouse.
But they are beating them decisively. They beat Washington State 45-0. They beat Iowa State 50-24. You don't accidentally win by 45 points. The recalibration is about maximizing the talent you have. Look at the player development. Trent Walker was a non-factor for years. Now he's catching 84-yard touchdowns. Zachary Card is leading the Jet Award race. These are players who are on the roster before, but Ward has unlocked them. That is the definition of good coaching.
I will agree that the offensive production has improved, particularly the explosive plays. But I worry about the feast or famine nature of it. In the Liberty game, they had only 165 total yards of offense, despite scoring 28 points, 165 yards. They won because of short fields and Liberty mistakes. If they put up 165 yards of offense against Florida, they will lose by 3 touchdowns.
That Liberty game was in Week 6 with Murphy at quarterback. We're discussing the team as it stands now entering Week 13. The offense under Johnson is averaging significantly more production. You cannot use the Murphy-era stats to predict the Johnson-era bowl game.
But the defense is the same unit. The defense that gave up 391 yards to Arizona is the same defense heading to Vegas, and that is where my skepticism remains rooted. You can change the quarterback and spark the offense, but you haven't fixed the fact that opposing quarterbacks are completing 78% of their passes against you, like Drake Lindsey did for Minnesota.
And yet, Lindsey took 4 sacks. The pressure gets home when it matters. That's the architect's design, disruption over suppression.
We shall see if that design holds up when the opposing quarterback doesn't panic.
So as we look toward this Las Vegas Bowl, where do you ultimately land on this Oregon State team?
I land on the side of caution. While 10-1 is an impressive achievement that should be celebrated by the fan base, that Week 7 Duke loss remains the cautionary tale. It showed us what happens when the chaos doesn't break Oregon State's way. The heavy reliance on turnovers, like the Iowa State kickoff disaster for the Cyclones, and the immense workload on Hankerson make them vulnerable. If Florida protects the ball and contains the edge, I think the recalibration hits a wall.
And I maintain that the architect, Caleb Ward, has delivered exactly what he promised, winning with less. The seamless transition to Gabari Johnson was a stroke of brilliance, not luck. The opportunistic defense is a feature of a high-effort culture, not a bug. They found ways to win in blowouts, in grinded-out games, and in shootouts. That versatility will serve them well in Vegas.
Complexity often requires multiple perspectives to fully appreciate. We have the optimist's view of the 10-1 record and the realist's view of the underlying stats.
And that is what makes this upcoming bowl game so exciting. It is the ultimate truth teller. Is the 10-1 record a monument to coaching genius or a statistical anomaly just waiting to correct itself?
I suspect the answer lies somewhere in the middle, but Friday, December 26th, will give us the data point we're all missing.
Indeed. Thank you for joining the debate. We encourage you to pull up the game logs, look at the drive charts, and decide for yourselves. Are the Beavers contenders or pretenders? Until next time.
And that's a wrap on this edition of State of the Beavers. Thanks for spending some time in the lodge with us today. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe on your favorite platform and leave us a review. It really helps the colony grow. Big thanks to our production team and, most importantly, to you for listening. Keep building, keep grinding, and we'll catch you on the next one. Until next time, this has been the State of the Beavers. Stay sharp out there.